What if the child you loved, cradled in your arms, defended before a hostile world, was suddenly revealed not to be yours? Imagine standing in a courtroom, your reputation already shredded by years of press attacks, your sanity questioned by the public, your loyalty doubted by your own family. And then a cold, clinical piece of paper tells you something you cannot accept. That is where Prince Harry found himself, staring at DNA results that threatened to erase the one role he still clung to, being a father. The silence in the courtroom was unbearable. No journalist dared to cough. No lawyers shuffled their papers. Even the judge seemed to pause longer than necessary before delivering the words that would ignite the firestorm. Everyone knew this was bigger than family drama. This was monarchy-level scandal. The very idea that Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor, the boy introduced to the world as the hope of a new, modern royal generation, might not share Harry's bloodline was enough to send shockwaves across continents. But for Harry, it wasn't about headlines. It was about identity, pride, and survival. And in that moment, his refusal to accept the truth became the biggest headline of them all. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You have to ask yourself, what would you do? Would you bow your head, accept the science, and move on? Or would you fight it, scream against it, and cling to the belief that your love for your child is stronger than any lab test? These are the questions Harry seemed to battle in real time. And the audience, millions of us watching from outside, were dragged into the storm whether we liked it or not. The truth is, this story matters now more than ever. The monarchy is not just a family. It is an institution built on legitimacy. Bloodlines, heritage, DNA. These aren't just scientific markers. They are the foundation upon which crowns rest and kingdoms stand. When you question the parentage of a royal child, you aren't just pulling at a family secret. You're tugging at the very thread that holds centuries of tradition together. And here we were, watching that thread snap in real time. But let's rewind for a moment. How did it come to this? The build-up wasn't overnight. For years, whispers followed Meghan Markle. Questions about her pregnancies, her unusual medical arrangements, the lack of visible hospital staff during Archie's birth. The press pounced on every inconsistency. Supporters dismissed it all as racist vitriol, while skeptics collected receipts like they were piecing together a mystery novel. And in the middle of it all was Harry, fiercely protective, snapping at journalists, suing newspapers, cutting off lifelong friends. To him, every question about Archie's legitimacy was not just gossip. It was a dagger aimed at his heart. And yet, the whispers never stopped. They grew louder. From palace corridors to public forums, the speculation gained momentum. When the court finally ordered DNA results, it was not out of cruelty but necessity. Too much was at stake. Too many contradictions had piled up. The world demanded clarity. Picture Harry walking into that courtroom. Shoulders tense, jaw set, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He wasn't just a father. He was a symbol. He carried the shadow of his mother, Princess Diana, the expectations of his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, and the scorn of his brother William. Every eye was on him. And then the envelope was opened. The judge's voice was calm, almost sterile, but each word landed like a thunderclap. The DNA results showed no paternal link between Prince Harry and Archie Harrison. The science was clear, the conclusion unavoidable. But Harry's reaction was not calm, not rational, not even royal. He went insane. At least, that's how it appeared to those in the room. His face twisted in disbelief, his voice cracked as he shouted, his fists pounded the table. This wasn't a prince processing news. This was a man drowning in betrayal. Now pause and ask yourself, have you ever seen someone reject a truth so violently, not because it wasn't true, but because they couldn't bear to accept it? That's the tragedy of Harry in this moment. He wasn't arguing with the facts. He was waging war against reality itself. And Meghan? That's where the story takes a darker turn. While Harry unraveled, Meghan remained eerily calm. Her silence, her composure, her stone-faced demeanor, it all added gasoline to the fire of suspicion. To some, she looked guilty. To others, she looked defiant. Either way, her reaction only deepened the mystery. Why does this matter now? Because this courtroom drama is not just about Harry and Meghan. It's about what happens when love, lies, and legacy collide. It's about whether one man's refusal to accept the truth could destabilize an entire institution. And it's about the child caught in the middle. Archie, a boy who never asked for this, who became the center of a storm before he could even speak his first words. We must also remember, Harry is not just a man in crisis. He is a prince raised in trauma. From losing his mother at 12 to living his adulthood under relentless cameras, Harry's life has been a series of wounds. He built his identity around loyalty, to his family, to Meghan, to Archie. So when the DNA test ripped one of those pillars away, what was left? Nothing but raw emotion. Nothing but rage. As the cameras flashed and the headlines rolled in, one thing became clear. This was no longer a private matter. This was public theater, with Harry and Meghan as unwilling actors, and the world as the audience. But the problem with theater is that it always demands an ending, a conclusion, a reveal. And what the court had revealed was only the beginning. Because if Archie was not Harry's son, then who was the father? If Meghan had concealed the truth, what else was hidden? If Harry refused to accept the DNA, how far would he go to protect the illusion? These questions are not just for the tabloids. They are for history itself. And here's where the irony cuts deepest. Harry has long accused the media of destroying his life. Yet here he was, giving them the most explosive story of all. His denial, his breakdown, his refusal to accept the science. It was all captured, dissected, and broadcast to millions. The very institution he loathed now had him at its mercy. But here's the thing. Denial is a powerful force. And in Harry's case, it became his shield. By refusing to accept the DNA, he wasn't just protecting Archie. He was protecting himself. Accepting the truth would mean accepting that his marriage, his identity, and his fight against the monarchy were all built on a lie. And that was too much for one man to bear. So where does this leave us? With a question. With a cliffhanger. Because the story didn't end in that courtroom. It didn't end with the judge's words or Harry's outburst. No, the story was only beginning. The sealed envelope had been opened, but the secrets inside weren't fully revealed. And what came next would shake the monarchy even harder. Because if you thought Harry's denial was shocking, wait until you hear what Meghan did next. The sealed envelope had been opened, but the secrets inside weren't fully revealed. And what came next would shake the monarchy even harder. Because if you thought Harry's denial was shocking, wait until you hear what Meghan did next. So let's step inside that courtroom again. The air was heavy, thicker than fog on the Thames. Reporters clutched their pens tighter. Photographers leaned forward, anticipating the shot that could define their careers. Lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, because even they knew what was about to happen wasn't ordinary procedure. It was history in the making. And then it happened. The judge cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and delivered the words that split the room in half. The DNA results indicate that Prince Harry is not the biological father of Archie Harrison. 14 words. 14 simple words. But each one landed like a hammer blow. Think about it. For years, the world had been told a story. The fairy tale marriage, the adorable child, the progressive future of the monarchy. Now that entire narrative collapsed in an instant. If you were in that room, what would you have felt? Shock, sympathy, anger, or maybe betrayal? Because the image you had been sold was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Harry's reaction was immediate and explosive. He didn't slump into his chair in quiet despair. He didn't shed silent tears like a tragic hero. No, he erupted. His fist slammed the table, the crack echoing off the courtroom walls. He shouted, at the judge, at the lawyers, at the faceless crowd of press in the back rows. His voice broke as he screamed words that barely made sense. He accused the court of conspiracy, the monarchy of sabotage, the press of lying. His face flushed red, his hands shook violently. This wasn't the calm, controlled Harry who had once walked behind his mother's coffin, his face stoic for the world. This was a man unraveling before our very eyes. And here's the contradiction. The louder he shouted, the weaker he looked. Because denial, when magnified, doesn't show strength, it exposes fragility. You could see the boy inside the man, screaming against the inevitability of truth. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself this. Have you ever seen someone reject a truth so violently, not because they believed it was false, but because they couldn't live with it being true? That was Harry in that moment. A man not fighting science, but fighting the collapse of his entire world. Meanwhile, Meghan sat in chilling contrast, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression still, almost unreadable. Some said she looked defiant, others said she looked guilty, but everyone agreed on one thing. She wasn't breaking. And that silence cut deeper than any words. Imagine being Harry, shattered, broken, screaming for support, and glancing at the woman beside you, the woman you gave up your family and your future for, only to see her face frozen like marble. Was that composure? Or was it calculation? Was she the victim of cruel speculation, or the architect of a deception too large to control? The judge tried to calm him. The lawyers attempted to restore order. But Harry wasn't listening. He was pacing now, his military training visible in the way his boots hit the floor, hard and deliberate. He pointed his finger at the evidence as if sheer force could erase it. He shouted lines no one expected. I am his father. No paper can tell me otherwise. This is a setup. This is war. Do you hear the desperation in those words? That wasn't just a denial. It was a declaration of battle. Harry wasn't prepared to surrender to science. He was prepared to fight reality itself. And then came the moment that shifted everything. A lawyer for the opposing side, a man in a sharp black suit with papers stacked neatly before him, rose to speak. He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. He simply said, Your Royal Highness, there is additional evidence. The room froze. What could be more damning than a DNA test? What else could they possibly have? That's when an officer stepped forward carrying a second envelope. This one thicker, heavier. And with it came the scent of something far more dangerous than science, history. Because inside wasn't just another test. Inside were documents, records, witness statements. The kind of evidence that didn't just question a child's father. It questioned an entire timeline. Harry froze mid-rant, his eyes locked on that envelope. The rage in his face flickered into something else, fear. Meghan, for the first time, shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening ever so slightly. Now let's slow down. Picture it. You're in the room. You see the prince sweating, trembling, desperate. You see Meghan composed, but suddenly tense. You see the court preparing to unleash something no one can take back. The whispers in the gallery began. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some mouthed silent prayers. Because everyone knew what was coming next could destroy more than a marriage. It could shatter a monarchy already hanging by a thread. And here's where irony delivers its cruelest blow. Harry, the man who spent years attacking the press, accusing them of manufacturing lies, now stood in front of undeniable truth. But the moment he feared wasn't just exposure. It was confirmation. The judge reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed the seal. Harry lunged forward, slamming his hands on the bench, shouting, Don't you dare open that. Don't you dare. His voice cracked into a plea, almost childlike. But it was too late. The seal broke. The papers slid free. The truth, long buried, whispered in corridors, speculated in tabloids, was about to see the light of day. And just when the judge prepared to read the first line, Harry did something no one expected. He collapsed into his chair, buried his face in his hands, and whispered words so faint that only those closest heard. This isn't happening. This can't be real. But it was real. And the question now wasn't whether the evidence was damning. It was how far Harry would go to keep the illusion alive. Because what was inside that envelope didn't just challenge Archie's paternity. It threatened to expose Meghan's deepest secrets. And here's the cliffhanger you need to sit with. The envelope had been opened. The evidence was on the table. And the next revelation wasn't about Harry. It was about Meghan. What happens when a man who has lived his whole life under the microscope finally loses control in front of the world? That was the question hanging in the air after the DNA results were read aloud. The courtroom wasn't just filled with silence. It was pulsing with tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. But Harry? He couldn't hold his. The outburst came like thunder. One moment, the judge's voice was steady and cold, delivering the results with clinical precision. The next, Harry was on his feet, red-faced, his voice booming so loud it rattled the chandeliers above. I am his father. He roared, slamming his fist against the polished wood of the table so hard that pens rolled and papers flew. No test can tell me otherwise. No one can take my son from me. It wasn't the dignified response people expected from a prince. It wasn't even the restrained composure of a man trained to endure public scrutiny. This was something rawer, something primal. It was the cry of a man whose world had just been ripped apart, and he was ready to claw it back with his bare hands. Let me ask you, have you ever seen someone so consumed by denial that reason itself slips out of their grasp? That's exactly what happened in that courtroom. Harry's words weren't measured. They weren't even coherent at times. He accused the court of rigging the test. He shouted at the lawyers, calling them traitors and liars. He pointed his finger at the press gallery, his voice breaking as he screamed, "You've wanted this all along. You've made me your villain, and now you're trying to take my son too." The irony was suffocating. The man who once declared war on the media, who fled his homeland to protect his family from the cameras, was now giving them the greatest spectacle of his life. Every click of a shutter, every note scribbled by a journalist, was another nail in the coffin of his dignity. And Meghan? She sat still, almost too still. Her eyes were locked forward, her face expressionless, as if she were determined not to feed the frenzy. But her silence only fanned the flames of suspicion. To many, she looked cold, detached, rehearsed. To others, she looked like a woman cornered, playing the only card she had left, control. Now think about the contradiction here. On one side of the table, Harry was unraveling, his voice echoing through the chamber, his fists slamming the table. On the other, Meghan was composed, unflinching, her silence as loud as his fury. It was a performance of opposites, chaos versus calm, denial versus silence. And together, it painted a picture of a marriage cracking under the weight of truth. Harry's military training flashed in small bursts. The way he stood, the way he stomped as he paced, the rigidness of his stance. It was all discipline fighting against despair. But even discipline has limits. His words betrayed him. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted. "You're working with them." He jabbed his finger toward the lawyers, then toward the judge himself. "This is not justice. This is a setup." Do you feel the desperation in those words? They weren't coming from a man who believed he was right. They were coming from a man who couldn't bear to be wrong. At one point, his voice cracked. He shouted so fiercely that his throat gave out, and what came next was less a roar than a plea. "He's my boy," Harry said, softer this time, almost broken. "He has to be." The courtroom shifted. Some felt pity, others disgust. Reporters scribbled faster, knowing this moment would be tomorrow's headline. A prince undone by the truth. But here's where the story takes an even darker twist. Just as Harry shouted his denials, one of the lawyers, stoic, deliberate, prepared, rose to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match Harry's fury. He simply said, "Your Royal Highness, additional evidence has been submitted." The words cut sharper than any scream. The room fell silent. The judge nodded toward the bailiff, who carried forward a second envelope. It was heavier, thicker, and its very presence seemed to press down on Harry's shoulders. He stopped mid-shout, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on that envelope like it was a ticking bomb. Meghan shifted for the first time. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. Her eyes flickered, not fear, not guilt, but something closer to calculation, as if she already knew what was inside. Harry's voice came again, but this time it was strained, cracking under the weight of panic. "Don't open it," he begged. "Don't you dare." But it was already too late. The seal was broken. The papers were drawn out. The court was about to hear something that went beyond DNA, beyond science. Witness statements, hospital records, inconsistencies too glaring to ignore. And the cruelest part? Harry knew it. He knew whatever was inside those papers would cut deeper than the test result. Because this wasn't just about proving who Archie's father wasn't. It was about proving who Meghan really was. Reporters leaned forward, their pens trembling. Lawyers braced themselves. Even the judge seemed to hesitate, aware that history itself was about to turn a page. And Harry? He did the unthinkable. He dropped back into his chair, buried his face in his hands, and whispered words that chilled the room. "This can't be happening. This isn't real." But it was real. And as the judge prepared to read the first line of the new evidence, one thought ran through everyone's mind. If Harry's denial was this explosive, how would he survive what was coming next? Because this wasn't the end of his outburst, it was only the beginning. And Meghan's silence? It wasn't going to last much longer. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't even whisper a single word. While Harry clawed at the edges of reality, shouting down the walls of truth, Meghan Markle sat perfectly still. Her back was straight, her jaw locked, her eyes fixed on the judge as though the chaos unraveling beside her was nothing more than background noise. Now let me ask you, was that strength or strategy? Because silence, in moments like this, speaks louder than screams. People in the courtroom noticed it. Reporters scribbled furiously. Meghan expressionless while Harry erupts. Lawyers whispered to each other. She doesn't seem surprised. Even the judge, who had tried to maintain a professional mask, glanced at Meghan more than once, as if trying to decode her stillness. Why didn't she comfort him? Why didn't she protest? Why didn't she at least look shocked? That's the contradiction that sent whispers racing around the world. If Meghan was innocent, if she truly believed the DNA results were false, wouldn't she have been outraged too? Wouldn't she have stood beside Harry, slammed the table herself, and demanded answers? But she didn't. She just sat there, cool as ice, as if she had seen this scene rehearsed 100 times before. And that's when the murmurs began. She knew. She must have known. This explains everything. The silence was feeding the fire. Now, step into Harry's shoes for a second. Imagine being a man shattered, screaming for truth, only to look beside you and see the one person you sacrificed everything for, calm, unbroken, untouched by the storm. Wouldn't that feel like betrayal? Harry's eyes darted toward her. His face twisted, not just with rage, but with confusion. It was as if he was begging her to say something, anything, that could shield him from the truth. But Meghan didn't give him what he wanted. She gave him nothing. And that's when the judge's voice cut through the tension again. Mrs. Markle, do you wish to respond? Every ear in the room strained for her words. Every eye locked onto her lips. This was her chance. She could deny. She could defend. She could even lash out. But Meghan only shook her head slightly and whispered, "No, Your Honor." 3 words. No explanation. No argument. Just cold refusal. The gasp that followed wasn't from Harry. It was from the press gallery. Because if her silence had been suspicious, her refusal was damning. Think about it. Silence is ambiguous. But refusal? That's a choice. Harry's face turned crimson. He slammed his palm against the table again, shouting, "Say something, Meghan. Tell them it's not true. Tell them." His voice cracked on the last word, but Meghan didn't move. She didn't even look at him. Now imagine that moment captured in photos. A husband, broken and desperate, begging for his wife's defense. A wife, stone-faced, staring straight ahead, giving him nothing. Those pictures alone were enough to ignite headlines around the globe. But inside the courtroom, it was worse. Because the lawyer holding the thicker envelope cleared his throat, and with Meghan's refusal still hanging in the air, he began to read. "Your Honor, these documents include sworn testimony from medical staff at Portland Hospital, records regarding the date and time of Mrs. Markle's alleged labor, and inconsistencies between those accounts and the official royal announcements." The room went still. Then he read on. "Multiple witnesses have stated that Mrs. Markle was not present at the time of delivery, and that another party may have been involved in the birth process." Chaos erupted. Reporters gasped. Lawyers objected. The judge raised his hand for silence. And Harry? He turned to Meghan, his voice cracking. "Tell me that's not true. Tell me you were there. Tell me." But Meghan remained frozen, her face unreadable, her lips pressed shut. Now pause here. Ask yourself, what does that look like to the outside world? Does it look like innocence? Or does it look like guilt? Because here's the irony. For years, Meghan had complained that she wasn't allowed to speak her truth, that the palace silenced her, that the press twisted her words. And yet in the one moment where speaking could have saved her husband, she chose silence. And silence, in that courtroom, was deadly. Let's zoom out. Across the globe, screens lit up as live updates hit the news cycle. Social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag DNA results, hashtag Archie scandal, hashtag Harry breakdown, and hashtag Meghan silence began trending within minutes. Memes were being made before the court even adjourned. Some mocked Harry as delusional. Others painted Meghan as manipulative. But all of them agreed. This was the biggest royal scandal since Diana's tapes. And yet, inside the courtroom, Harry still refused to believe it. He shouted over the lawyer, shouted at the judge, shouted at anyone who would listen. "This is fabricated. You're trying to destroy us." His voice was hoarse now, his body shaking. But Meghan? She sat unmoved, as if she were carved from stone. The contradiction was unbearable. A husband desperate to fight, a wife unwilling to move, and a court prepared to expose everything. And here's the twist no one saw coming. Just as Harry pounded the table again, Meghan finally turned her head. Slowly, deliberately, she looked him in the eye, and in a voice just loud enough for him to hear, she said, "Stop embarrassing yourself." Harry froze. The court gasped, because those 4 words didn't sound like a wife defending her husband. They sounded like a warning. And that warning changed everything. Because what Meghan did next would shatter the room more than the DNA results ever could. Stop embarrassing yourself. 4 words, delivered not with anger, not with compassion, but with a chilling finality that silenced even Harry in mid-rant. The echo of her voice hung in the courtroom like smoke after a gunshot. For a moment, the prince just stood there, staring at his wife as though he hadn't recognized her before that instant. The press gallery erupted in whispers. Journalists scribbled furiously. The judge adjusted his glasses, trying to regain control of the room. But Meghan's words had landed harder than the DNA results themselves. They weren't words of solidarity. They weren't words of comfort. They were words of dismissal. And then the envelope was lifted higher. The sealed, heavier envelope. Now, think about this. Why did the mere sight of that second envelope terrify Harry so much? The DNA test was already devastating. But this was something else. Something worse. Because paper can carry more than science. It can carry history. It can carry secrets that burn reputations to the ground. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost clinical. Your Honor, within this envelope are supplemental documents related to Mrs. Markle's pregnancy and Archie's birth. Every word felt like a hammer strike. Harry's jaw clenched. His fists tightened. Meghan, for the first time, shifted ever so slightly. It was small, just a tightening of her lips, a flicker in her eyes. But in a room where every gesture was magnified, it spoke volumes. The judge broke the seal. The sound was deafening in its simplicity, a thin tear of paper. But to Harry, it might as well have been the sound of his entire life splitting apart. He lunged forward, slamming his palms against the table. No, this isn't evidence. This is slander. You have no right. His voice was ragged now, desperation dripping from every syllable. The judge, unfazed, pulled out the first page. His eyes scanned the words, then he read aloud. This testimony comes from a medical staff member present at Portland Hospital on the day of Archie Harrison's reported birth. The witness states that Mrs. Markle was not seen in the delivery ward at the times documented in official royal records. Gasps filled the chamber. Harry staggered back as if he had been physically struck. But the lawyer wasn't done. He continued. The witness further claims that the arrangements for the birth were highly irregular, and that alternative procedures may have been used to conceal the identity of the biological mother. Now pause. Ask yourself, if you were Harry, standing in that room, listening to those words, would you still be able to deny what was unfolding? Or would you feel the ground beneath your feet finally give way? Harry's face crumbled. His denial clashed with reality in the most brutal way. He shook his head violently. Lies. All of it lies. But his voice lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man begging not to be convinced. And then all eyes turned to Meghan. Would she deny it? Would she leap to her feet and call it a fabrication? Would she finally defend her husband? She didn't. Instead, she sat there, her hands clasped neatly in her lap, and for the first time, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. Do you hear the contradiction? A man collapsing in front of the world, and a woman who seemed almost relieved that the truth, or at least some version of it, was finally being laid bare. The lawyer pressed on, flipping to another page. We also submit photographic evidence of documents signed under an alternate name at the hospital, signatures which appear to match Mrs. Markle's handwriting, but which list her under a different identity. The whispers grew louder, boiling into a storm. Reporters leaned forward, pins scratching, some unable to hide their gasps. Harry turned to Meghan, his voice breaking into fragments. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't. But Meghan cut him off with a glance. A sharp, slicing look that said everything and nothing at once. This wasn't just courtroom drama anymore. This was theater, and Meghan was playing her role to perfection. The judge tried to calm the room. We will hear all the evidence in full before any conclusions are drawn. But Harry couldn't wait. He grabbed at the papers, trying to snatch them from the lawyer's hands. Guard stepped forward. The tension was palpable, like a rubber band stretched too far. One snap, and the entire room would erupt. And then came the moment that sent shivers through everyone present. The lawyer read one final line. In light of these testimonies and records, the possibility must be considered that Archie Harrison may have been born under circumstances not consistent with the official royal narrative. The official royal narrative. 3 words that carried centuries of weight. To question the monarchy itself. Harry's scream pierced the silence. No, he's my son. He's mine. His voice broke into sobs, his fists pounding against the table as guards restrained him. Meghan didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the envelope, as if watching a play she had already seen before. And here's where you must ask yourself, why didn't she fight harder? Why didn't she grab the papers and tear them apart? Why didn't she at least put her arm around Harry, show the world she was on his side? Was it guilt? Was it strategy? Or was it something darker? Because in that moment, Meghan's silence said more than words ever could. And as the papers lay spread across the judge's bench, the weight of their contents heavy in the air, one truth became clear. The story of Archie's birth was far from over. What came next would not only expose secrets buried deep within the hospital walls, it would bring forward a witness no one expected. And her testimony would shake the foundation of Harry and Meghan's entire world. Rewind. That's exactly what the courtroom did in that moment. Not literally, but emotionally. The judge, the lawyers, the press, even Harry himself, all were pulled backward in time. Away from the evidence, away from the testimonies, back to a picture-perfect illusion that had been sold to the world years earlier. The image was burned into memory. Harry, glowing with pride, standing beside Meghan as they cradled Archie for the very first time in front of the cameras. His red hair, her flawless smile, the carefully posed scene in St. George's Hall. The flashbulbs popped. The headlines screamed, "A modern royal family. A new hope for the monarchy." But now, with the courtroom revelations spilling out like poisoned ink, that image no longer looked magical. It looked staged. It looked rehearsed. It looked, dare I say it, fake. And that's where the contradictions became impossible to ignore. Think about it. The press wasn't allowed inside the hospital during Archie's birth. The official announcements came late, muddled with odd timelines. Meghan's baby bump seemed to change sizes from one public appearance to another. And then there was the christening, private, closed off, with photos so carefully cropped that people asked more questions than they answered. At the time, Harry fought like a lion against the critics. He snarled at the press, cut off friends who dared to question, even iced out family members who raised doubts. Every criticism, every rumor, he brushed off as racism, cruelty, or jealousy. But here's the irony. The very moments he had defended most fiercely were now being dragged back into the light, and they didn't look the same anymore. Let me ask you, have you ever looked back at a memory and realized it wasn't what you thought it was? That's what was happening in that courtroom. The fairy tale was cracking. One lawyer even pulled up archival footage on a screen. Those iconic first photos of Harry, Meghan, and baby Archie. He slowed the reel. He pointed to the way Meghan clutched the baby, her eyes darting nervously toward the cameras. He noted Harry's exaggerated grin, the kind that looked more like a mask than genuine joy. He even froze on the moment where Meghan's hand covered Archie's head just a little too tightly, almost as if shielding something. Was this protection? The lawyer asked coldly. Or concealment? Harry leapt to his feet. "You have no right," he shouted. But the damage was done. The perfect family image was no longer untouchable. It was evidence. And this is where it gets worse. Because the lawyer didn't stop at the photos. He pulled up the statements from palace aides, the ones that described the chaos behind the scenes. One aide had testified that Meghan refused standard medical protocols. Another claimed the palace press team was given delayed and altered information. The illusion of the perfect family was beginning to collapse. And Harry? He fought it with everything he had. "We were protecting our privacy," he bellowed. His voice cracked with emotion. "We didn't want our child paraded like a trophy." But here's the contradiction. Privacy wasn't the issue anymore. Truth was. And the truth was closing in fast. Now pause here. Remember how we all felt seeing those first pictures? The joy, the curiosity, the hope that maybe, just maybe, Harry had finally found happiness after the tragedy of his youth. Millions of people around the world smiled that day. Mothers compared Archie's features to Diana's. Fathers admired Harry's glow. For one moment, the royals didn't look cold and distant. They looked human. But the courtroom stripped that away. Suddenly, those same photos looked like a carefully crafted stage set. A performance designed to distract from the fact that something wasn't right behind the scenes. And if that illusion could be shattered, what else could? The answer came in the form of a name. A witness. Someone who had been there from the very beginning. The lawyer's voice dropped into a dramatic pause, then rose again. Your Honor, the court will now hear testimony from a palace staff member who raised concerns about Archie's birth from the very first day. The doors creaked open. Heads turned. A woman walked in, small, unassuming, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her statement. But the weight of her presence was enormous. She wasn't just anyone. She was a midwife's assistant who had worked at the hospital, someone with first-hand knowledge of what took place that day. Harry's face drained of color. Meghan's eyes flickered, just for a second. This was the whistleblower. Now imagine the tension. The silence was so thick you could hear the faint scratch of a pen in the press gallery. The judge leaned forward. The witness cleared her throat. And then she spoke. What the world was told about Archie's birth, she said quietly, is not what really happened. The room gasped. Harry shot to his feet. Lies. All lies. But his voice was drowned out by the frenzy. The reporters, the lawyers, even the judge knew the game had changed. Because this wasn't just about DNA anymore. This was about dismantling the perfect family illusion piece by piece. The witness went on. She described how Meghan's name had appeared inconsistently on hospital logs. How staff were barred from certain rooms without explanation. How paperwork had been rushed, signatures mismatched, details scrubbed clean. And then came the final blow. I never saw Meghan Markle in the delivery ward, the woman said firmly. Silence. Absolute silence. Harry's chest heaved. Meghan's lips pressed into a thin line. The fairy tale family image, the one that had been plastered across magazines, celebrated in documentaries, immortalized in photographs. It was crumbling in front of the world. And the question every single person in that courtroom was asking was simple. If Meghan wasn't in the ward, then who was? What the world was told about Archie's birth is not what really happened. Those 12 words didn't just hang in the air, they detonated like a bomb. You could feel the shock ripple through the courtroom, see it etched on every face. Reporters gripped their pens so tightly that a few even snapped in half. Aides whispered behind their hands. Even the judge, who had managed to stay composed through Harry's outbursts, sat back in his chair with wide eyes. And then, as though time itself had slowed, the witness continued. I never saw Meghan Markle in the delivery ward. Not once. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt unnatural. It was the kind of silence that makes you wonder if the walls themselves are listening. Harry's reaction was instant. He shot to his feet, his face twisted in fury. You're lying. You weren't there. You don't know what you're talking about. His voice cracked on the last word, and in that crack, you could hear the desperation bleeding through. But the witness didn't flinch. She held her statement firmly in both hands, her voice steady despite the storm swirling around her. I was there, she insisted. I signed in. I worked that shift. And I am telling this court, I never saw her. There was another woman, but it wasn't Meghan Markle. Let me ask you, what do you think the press did in that moment? Exactly. They exploded. The scratching of pens became a furious storm. Phones buzzed. Fingers flew across screens as live updates were blasted to the outside world. Headlines were already writing themselves. Courtroom shock. Meghan absent at Archie's birth? And Harry? He was unraveling before our eyes. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He pointed at the witness, his voice booming. You're part of this conspiracy. You've been paid to destroy us. The judge's gavel slammed. Prince Harry, you will contain yourself. But Harry couldn't. He was a man in freefall, clawing for anything to stop the descent. Meanwhile, Meghan sat in her chair, still eerily composed. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed, but her body language remained controlled. Almost too controlled. Because when someone's world is falling apart, most people show cracks. Meghan didn't. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed for this very moment. And that's what sent chills down the spines of everyone watching. Now, think about the contradiction here. A husband unraveling, screaming at a witness. A wife sitting silent, as if she had already decided no amount of shouting could save them. Which on? The witness pressed on. She described how certain staff were barred from sections of the hospital, how curtains were drawn tight, security doubled, paperwork rushed through in secrecy. She spoke of signatures that didn't match, dates that didn't add up, and a medical file that mysteriously disappeared 2 days later. Harry interrupted again, his voice raw. "You don't know what you're saying. You're twisting everything." But his protests were drowned out by the murmurs in the room. Because the details were too precise, too damning. The judge leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that the official records of Archie's birth were falsified?" The witness hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." That's when Harry lost it completely. He lunged forward, as though he might leap across the room, only to be restrained by 2 guards. His voice broke into a scream. "He's my son. He's mine. And here's the tragedy." Those words, shouted in desperation, no longer sounded convincing. They sounded hollow. "Let me put this to you directly. Have you ever seen someone fight so hard for a truth that wasn't theirs to claim?" That's what Harry looked like in that moment. A man clinging to a rope that was already cut. The whistleblower wasn't finished. Her testimony built brick by brick, each one dismantling the carefully crafted image of Archie's birth. She even claimed that another name, one not released to the public, appeared on documents connected to the delivery. Now pause and let that sink in. Another name. What name? Whose name? The press gallery erupted into whispers. Phones lit up with speculation. The idea that another woman might have been involved in Archie's birth wasn't just scandalous, it was catastrophic. Because if true, it didn't just make Meghan a liar. It made the entire royal narrative a fraud. And Harry? He turned to Meghan, his face a mask of betrayal. "Tell them," he begged. "Tell them it isn't true." But Meghan's silence was deafening. Her hands remained folded. Her eyes stayed forward. And when she finally did speak, it wasn't the denial Harry wanted. Her voice was quiet, controlled, calculated. "I will not dignify lies with a response." Gasps filled the courtroom. Some saw that as dignity. Others saw it as guilt. But here's the kicker. The witness wasn't alone. The lawyer announced that additional testimonies from hospital staff would be submitted. This wasn't one voice. This was a chorus. Harry slumped back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Meghan adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, composed as ever. And that's when the lawyer dropped the final twist. There is also mention of footage, surveillance footage, that may shed further light on the events of that day. The courtroom froze. Harry's head snapped up. Meghan's jaw tightened. Because testimony could be dismissed as opinion. But footage? Footage doesn't lie. And the world would soon see exactly what that footage revealed. One word. And suddenly, the room was no longer just tense. It was suffocating. Everyone leaned forward, every eye locked on the lawyer as though he were about to unveil a holy relic. Because while testimonies can be debated and documents can be forged, footage is forever. Harry's body went rigid. Meghan, for the first time, showed the faintest crack in her composure. Her lips pressed tighter, her shoulders drew back, and her eyes darted, just for a second, toward the exit. The lawyer set the stage. "Your Honor, the court has received video evidence, obtained from security cameras at Portland Hospital. This footage was previously sealed, but has now been made available as part of these proceedings." A murmur rippled across the room. Journalists scribbled with a frenzy. Some nearly tripped over themselves trying to angle for a better view. This was it, the piece of evidence no one could spin. Harry slammed his palms on the table. "No, this is invasion of privacy. You can't." But the judge cut him off. "Prince Harry, enough. The footage will be reviewed." And then the screen flickered on. Picture it. A grainy black and white hallway, time-stamped, the sterile walls of a hospital. Staff moved in and out of view. Nurses carrying clipboards. Doctors speaking in hushed tones. It looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Until the camera caught it. At 2:37 a.m., a woman was escorted down the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards. Her face was partially obscured, her body cloaked in a large coat, a hood pulled low. She was ushered through a set of double doors, the maternity ward. And here's the kicker. That woman wasn't Meghan Markle. Gasps erupted. The room thundered with whispers. Even the judge leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Harry's face drained of all color. He shook his head violently. That's not what it looks like. It's nothing. It means nothing. His words were tripping over themselves now, each one more desperate than the last. But the lawyer pressed on. He pointed to the screen. Note the time. This is the exact window during which Archie's birth was reportedly taking place. Yet the individual seen here, entering under escort, does not appear to be Mrs. Markle. The footage rolled on. At 4:16 a.m., the same woman was escorted out, this time in a wheelchair. A nurse wheeled her swiftly down the corridor, her face still obscured. Behind her, a small bundle, covered in a blanket, rested in her arms. And again, it wasn't Megan. The press gallery exploded. Phones buzzed furiously, journalists shouted over each other, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. Order in this court. But the order was gone. Harry jumped to his feet, his voice hoarse. That could be anyone. You don't know who that is. You can't prove anything. His eyes darted wildly, looking for allies, for someone to back him up. But all he saw were stares. Cold, horrified stares. And Megan? She leaned back in her chair, her face finally shifting into something new. Not panic, not fear, but defiance. Her chin lifted slightly, as if to say, so what if you see it? You still don't know the whole story. But let's pause here. Imagine being in that room, watching the footage, your mind racing. If that wasn't Megan, then who was it? And if that wasn't Megan, then what did it mean about Archie's birth? The lawyer spoke again, his voice like a blade. The hospital records show inconsistencies. Staff logs suggest restricted access to the ward during these hours. Multiple witnesses claim Megan was not present. And now we see this footage. He let the silence stretch. The evidence suggests a surrogate may have been involved. The word hit like an earthquake. Surrogate. Harry roared in protest. No, that's not true. Don't you dare say that about my wife. He lunged forward, his fists clenched, but guards held him back. His voice broke into sobs. He's my son, he has to be. Now think about that moment. The Prince of England, once a soldier, once a symbol of strength, reduced to tears in front of the world. A man begging reality not to betray him. And Megan? She sat motionless, her lips curved ever so slightly at the edges. Not quite a smile, but close enough to be noticed. The press didn't miss it. Cameras zoomed in, pens scribbled wildly. Within hours, that single frame, Megan's half-smile as the footage rolled, would be splashed across front pages. Some called it arrogance. Others called it madness. But everyone agreed. It was damning. The footage ended. The screen went black. And the silence that followed was suffocating. The judge looked from Harry to Megan, then back to the lawyers. We will recess briefly to review the admissibility of this evidence. His gavel struck, but it didn't matter. The court had already seen enough. The illusion was gone. Harry collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Megan sat tall, unbroken, and the world outside was left asking one question. If Megan wasn't the woman in that footage, then who was? And the answer was about to walk through the courtroom doors. The double doors creaked open. All eyes turned at once. The air so heavy you could hear the faint hum of the lights above. The security officer stepped inside first, followed by a woman. Her face pale, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. She clutched her bag to her chest, as though it were a shield. And then came the announcement that sucked every last breath from the room. Your Honor, this is the woman identified in the footage. A murmur thundered through the chamber. Journalists nearly fell out of their seats. Lawyers stiffened. Even the judge, who had spent a career handling scandal, shifted uncomfortably. Because this wasn't just any woman. She was someone the world had never seen before. But in that moment, she was the most important person alive to the future of the monarchy. Harry's face twisted. Shock, confusion, rage. He cycled through all of them in seconds. No, he muttered, shaking his head violently. No. Megan, on the other hand, adjusted her posture. Sat taller. Her lips pressed into that same razor-thin line. And when her eyes finally flicked toward the woman, it wasn't fear in them. It was recognition. The woman's name was read into the record. A hospital worker, connected to a private network of medical surrogates. Sworn under oath. She had been the one wheeled out of that ward in the footage. The press went wild. Hashtags began forming before her testimony even began. Hashtag surrogate bombshell. Hashtag Archie truth. Hashtag Harry in denial. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was frothing, hungry for every detail. The lawyer cleared his throat. Miss, can you confirm your role on the night in question? Her voice trembled, but the words were steady enough. I was part of the arrangement. I delivered Archie Harrison. The courtroom erupted. Harry leapt to his feet, roaring, Liar! You're a liar. This is all made up. His fists pounded the table until the wood echoed like a drum. His face was crimson, his voice cracked, and for the first time, the guards had to step forward, ready to restrain him if he tried to lunge. But the woman didn't flinch. She pulled a folded paper from her bag and handed it to the lawyer. It was her signed contract. Confidential, sealed, hidden until now. Her name, her payment, the conditions. Megan's eyes locked on the document. Not panic, not fear, but something darker, like a chess player watching her opponent finally find the missing piece of the puzzle, yet still believing she could outplay him. Now pause. Imagine being Harry in that moment. Imagine standing there, your whole life on trial, and suddenly a stranger claims she gave birth to your child. Imagine the humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer insanity of it all. Would you break? Or would you fight harder than ever before? Harry chose to fight. He shouted until his voice gave out. He called it fraud, called it treason, accused the court of collusion, the palace of sabotage. His words weren't coherent anymore. They were shards of rage, flying in every direction. And Megan? Still silent, still calculated, still playing the role of a woman above it all. The witness described everything. The hours of labor, the secrecy of the ward, the payments made through a private intermediary, the insistence that her identity never be revealed. Why now? The judge asked her. Her eyes filled with tears. Because the truth matters. I was told to disappear. I was told I'd never be mentioned. But when I saw my face in that footage, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The contradiction was brutal. A stranger weeping on the stand. A husband unraveling beside her. A wife frozen in stone silence. And the irony? The very child Harry had built his identity around. The son he had used as justification for leaving the monarchy, the boy he swore to protect from the media, was now at the center of the media's most explosive scandal. Reporters scribbled furiously. Social feeds detonated. The narrative was no longer speculation, it was declaration. But the courtroom wasn't done yet. Because the witness had one final bombshell. She leaned into the microphone, her voice low but clear. I was told the father was not Harry. Gasps. Screams. Lawyers leapt to their feet, shouting objections. The judge slammed his gavel again and again, but order was gone. Harry collapsed into his chair, clutching his head. His lips moved, but no sound came out. And Megan? For the first time, her mask cracked. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared, and she looked, just for a heartbeat, like a cornered animal. Because the next words out of that witness's mouth threatened to expose everything. This was arranged, she whispered, and I was told who the father really was. The courtroom froze. The world froze. And what came next would tear apart not just Harry and Meghan, but the entire royal family. This was arranged, and I was told who the father really was. The words slashed through the air like a knife. Every sound in the courtroom died at once. Even the clicking of cameras, even the scratching of pens, gone. For one suspended moment, the world stood still. Harry's head shot up. His face was ghost white, his eyes bloodshot from rage and tears. He looked at the witness like she had just cursed him to his face. Don't say it, he croaked, his voice hoarse. Don't you dare say it. Meghan's jaw tightened. Her hands, which had remained folded neatly in her lap until now, curled into fists against her knees. She knew what was coming. She knew the dam was about to break. The witness trembled, her voice shaking but her resolve unflinching. The man they told me was the father. She paused, inhaling deeply. It wasn't Prince Harry. The room erupted. Reporters shouted, their voices clashing in a frenzy. Lawyers barked objections, their words lost in the chaos. The judge slammed his gavel so hard it nearly cracked, shouting for order. But Harry couldn't wait. He staggered to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at the witness. Lies. His voice cracked, hysteria rising. This is slander. This is treason against the crown. The judge's voice thundered back. Prince Harry, sit down. But Harry couldn't sit. He was unraveling, a man possessed. His whole body shook as he shouted. Who is it? Who are you saying he is? His voice cracked into desperation. Tell me who you're accusing. The witness glanced nervously at the lawyer, who nodded. Then she turned back to the court, her voice a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. I was told the biological father was someone Meghan knew before her marriage. The collective gasp nearly shook the walls. Harry's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, his face twisted in horror. No, 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 no. His words dissolved into sobs. Meghan, though? Her silence was thunderous. Her expression stone, her eyes hard. And yet, just for a split second, her lips twitched, as if she wanted to say something, but swallowed it back. Now, imagine the fury in that moment. Reporters firing questions in hushed whispers. Who? Was it an ex? Was it someone powerful? Every single person in the room was dying for the name. And then, like a blade cutting through the madness, the lawyer said it. The name provided in testimony will be entered into the record, Your Honor. The judge, pale-faced, nodded slowly. Proceed. The lawyer unfolded a second document, his voice steady. According to this testimony, the father identified was not Prince Harry, but a man with whom Mrs. Markle had prior involvement. He paused deliberately, scanning the court. The name has been redacted from public record pending verification. A roar of outrage filled the room. Reporters screamed in protest. Name him, they shouted. Who is it? The gallery became a storm of demands, every journalist desperate to be the first to tweet it out. But inside the courtroom, the damage was already done. Harry collapsed back into his chair, his hands clawing at his face, his sobs echoing in the chamber. His whole frame shook, the soldier-turned-prince reduced to a broken man. Who is he? He whispered, almost to himself. Tell me who. But Meghan didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Now pause. Think about that. A husband on the verge of collapse, begging his wife for the truth, and she won't meet his eyes. What does that say? What does that silence scream? Because silence, in that courtroom, was betrayal. The irony is brutal. For years, Harry had been the shield, blocking the press, blocking the palace, blocking anyone who dared question Meghan. And now, when he needed her most, she gave him nothing. The judge finally restored order, his gavel beating like a drum. The name will remain sealed until this court has confirmed authenticity. But the truth was out already. Maybe not the exact name, but the knowledge, the suggestion, the devastating implication that Harry was not Archie's father, and Meghan had known all along. Harry rose again, stumbling as though his legs barely worked. His voice was a hoarse whisper, broken and raw. Meghan, please. Tell me it's not true. Tell me this isn't happening. Still, she sat silent. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Meghan finally spoke. Her voice was cold, measured, unapologetic. Sit down, Harry. The court gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. And Harry looked at her as though she had driven a dagger through his chest. This was no longer about DNA. This was no longer about Archie. This was about betrayal. And the worst part? The next piece of evidence wasn't testimony. It wasn't paperwork. It was something no one in that room could deny. The hospital file. And what it revealed would obliterate the last shred of Harry's denial. The hospital file. Two words that shifted the energy in the room from chaos to dread. Because while witnesses can be discredited and rumors can be brushed aside, a hospital file carries weight. Cold, clinical, unfeeling weight. Paper doesn't lie. Numbers don't invent themselves. The lawyer held the folder in his hands as though it contained the crown jewels. The judge adjusted his glasses, preparing for the blow. The press leaned forward, cameras poised, pens trembling above their notepads. Even the guards at the back of the room seemed to stiffen, aware that history was about to be cracked open. Harry shook his head violently, sweat beading on his forehead. Don't, he begged. Don't read it. This isn't evidence, it's invasion. This isn't fair. His voice rose, cracking. You have no right to drag my family through this. The judge, stone-faced, replied. Prince Harry, this court has every right to pursue the truth. And with that, the file was opened. The first page was read aloud. According to official hospital logs, Mrs. Meghan Markle was scheduled for admittance to Portland Hospital on May 6, 2019. Harry exhaled sharply, almost in relief. See? That's proof. She was there. But the lawyer's voice cut him down in an instant. And yet, the intake form contains discrepancies. The height and weight listed do not match Mrs. Markle's official medical record. Blood type, inconsistent. The attending physician's name, redacted. Gasps rippled through the room.